Hey, budding herbalists. I'm Maria Noel Groves, owner of Wintergreen Botanicals and author of Body into Balance and Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. Today, we're here to make a sort of extra remedy for you, and that is a simmered syrup that's been concentrated down. And we're ultimately going to be making this with molasses, but you could use the same principles. And instead of using molasses, you could use regular sugar, or you could use honey, or you could use glycerin if you wanted something that was sweet but actually didn't have any sort of blood sugar impact at all. And you can use this concept for a variety of recipes. You could use it for any kind of cough syrup recipe featuring ingredients that can withstand simmering. So for example, elecampane would be a really good consideration there because that root can be simmered for a long time and make a really great syrup. And what we're going to do though is we're going to use a combination of medicinal mushrooms and astragalus root as well as some nutritive rich herbs that have some general detoxifying properties to make just kind of a general beneficial recipe. This is something that I actually want to make anyway for my own personal use. And so it doesn't necessarily fit into any specific body system that goes with a specific class, but it's just kind of a nice way to be thinking about recipes and remedies. So you could do this with mushrooms, you could do this with immune tonics, you could do it with mineral rich plants, you could be doing it with respiratory tonics as long as there's something that can withstand all that simmering and really make it your own. And while you could add alcohol to it, like we're gonna do in our actual like regular cough syrup class, in this one, I'm gonna actually leave the alcohol out. And the downside to that is it means that this is not a shelf stable recipe, and how refrigerator, how long of a lifespan it has in the refrigerator is actually gonna vary quite a bit. My personal goal here is to concentrate this down until I actually have very little liquid left so that it will stay for much longer in the refrigerator, just preserved by the molasses and the refrigeration. But one of the things that you can definitely do with syrups, if you're not sure how long they'll keep and you want to make sure they don't go bad on you, is you could store your extras in the freezer and just keep a small jar, maybe like a 1 week supply or so, in the refrigerator and then pull as needed from the freezer when you need a new batch. You can either keep a bunch of smaller bottles or you can just keep a bigger bottle that you thaw out, refill, and then put that back in the freezer. And that's a great way to get around this sort of like, I don't know exactly how shelf stable this is going to be, even in the refrigerator. It could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 6 months. It's really hard to say because there's so many different variables. But by storing the extras in the freezer and aiming to go through what you have in the refrigerator in a week, you're going to be on a pretty safe side. Most likely this will keep for much longer than that. I've kept some for months at a time, but I only had very little actual concentrated liquid in the end that I used, and most of it was molasses. The shelf life of your sweetener is going to come into play too, and how good of a shelf life your final recipe has. So one of the most popular ingredients to use as a sweetener in syrups is just your regular junky white sugar, and that's because it's actually a little better at preserving versus an organic sugar, a less refined sugar. Maple syrup is probably one of the lowest on the list as far as shelf stability, because even on its own, once it's open, maple syrup is not shelf stable and can go bad. So it really doesn't give you very much, it doesn't really give you any shelf stability at all. So having something that's like sugar, molasses, honey is going to put you in a better place. Also, glycerin does a pretty good job there too, but you're going to want to keep that moisture content down if you want it to keep for longer. Traditionally, your syrups are often made with about equal parts sugar and water. So let's say, you had your finished extract, your strong tea, and you had a cup of that, you would want to just keep adding sugar to it until you got up to the 2 cup mark, and then you might heat it up a little bit if you were using sugar so that you have a chance to melt it down, or if you would use honey, you would just take it from the 1 cup mark to the 2 cup mark. So you're generally going to double it with your sweetener. So that does mean that syrups are indeed sweet, which makes them enjoyable to take, but it does mean that they're not quite as health promoting as some other recipes. They're a great option though if it's something that's going to be part of your daily tonic. For me, I love the idea of adding some of these herbs into my daily use without having to turn to something as tedious as a tea that I have to make every day, or something alcoholic, because while I do take tinctures in the morning, I really don't want to consume any more alcohol, but I would love to be adding more herbs to my daily routine. So I like these syrups. And in fact, my ultimate goal for today's syrup is that it's something that I'm going to be able to add to my coffee as my coffee sweetener with herbs that are going to complement the flavor of coffee. And you could certainly do this with herbal coffee as well, even though I am drinking regular coffee personally. So we're going to start off by just starting our ingredients to make our strong simmered tea. And I'm going to be using a variety of ingredients here. So we're going to start off with stinging nettle as a mineral-rich herb mainly, but also as a little bit of an alternative. Alteratives are herbs that support the gentle detoxification of the body by encouraging the body's own natural processes. But really for me, the main reason I'm incorporating nettle is because of its nutritive benefits. It's very high in minerals. And I'm just going to throw maybe a spoonful or two. This recipe is not, anything super formal, but it's inspired by one of the recipes in the nutritive garden in my book, Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. It's a sort of a variation on that. It's a mineral-rich syrup in that. And then we're going to throw a little bit of chicory root, and this is roasted chicory root. And I love to use roasted chicory root when I do want to impart a little bit of that coffee-like flavor. It does have some of the same medicinal properties as your dandelion root would. They're very closely related. It's not quite as potent as dandelion root, but similar. And then when you roast it, you do add a little bit of extra nutritive benefits. So we'll throw a little bit of that in there. Just one heaping spoonful of that. On that same note, we're going to add some dandelion, which is a little bit more bang for our buck. In the alternative group, it is somewhat rich in minerals as well, although the leaves have more minerals in them than the roots do. But dandelion does have some good liver support properties, a little bit of a kidney diuretic. In fact, a couple of the herbs here are a little bit diuretic, which means it'll help make you pee more, which is probably good for us in the general scheme of things, although I want to keep it to a modest amount because I already pee plenty as it is. And we're going to throw some burdock, which is another alternative herb that plays nicely with these other herbs that we're using here, has some minerals, but it's just a really nice ingredient. We'll just throw a spoonful or so of that in. And then we're going to throw some of our more deep immune tonics. And so reishi mushroom, this is a mushroom that's kind of bitter, but yeah, it is really quite palatable alongside with coffee or those coffee-like flavors. Sometimes I'll make an herbal coffee and I'll throw reishi mushroom in with some of these other ingredients and skip the true coffee altogether. And it tastes decent that way. And this will also taste quite nice as a syrup to sweeten my regular coffee. And I might not always like reishi in other tea recipes, or even my broth recipes, but it's quite nice here. So I'm going to throw a pretty good amount of that one in because I do really like that. And I just took the slices of reishi and ground that up in my bullet grinder, and it makes this kind of chuff of almost like an insulation kind of material. It doesn't really powder up. And then last but not least, I'm also going to add some astragalus, which is another deep immune tonic and immune modulator. I feel like we could always use a little extra support on the immune system. Some of these herbs are also helpful for folks who have regular allergies with the astragalus, the reishi mushroom, and then also the nettle and the dandelion. These are all herbs that help over time. If you're using them regularly, they may help reduce the likelihood of your body to go into sort of an immune over response to allergens. So kind of a nice little thing to play around with as well. So throw a little bit more astragalus in there. And I'm just going to stir this up. Now let's see, how much do we have? We ended up with, I think, about a cup. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like we have about a cup here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in my pot. And then I want to add enough water that it's really covered up quite nicely, but I do want to make a strong tea. So I'll probably add about 2 cups in, but I'm going to play that by ear. So if it looks like I need a little bit more or a little less, that's fine. So let's add some of that in. I probably have about 2 cups here with me today. And I'm going to stir that in. So that's pretty good, but I wouldn't mind maybe having a little bit more moisture to go on. So let me throw a little bit more in. So that does bring me to about 2 cups of water to 1 cup of herbs. And I'm just going to bring that to a gentle simmer. So we'll turn it up, and then as it starts to come to a simmer, we'll turn it down to a gentle boil. And I'm going to ultimately, we'll take it away from the camera for a little while once it gets going so that you don't have to sit through all that. But what we're going to do is I'm going to simmer it for a good hour on low, on the lowest setting, just barely simmering to kind of pull out all that goodness. If I wanted to add a little bit of vinegar to this, I would get more minerals, or if I wanted to do this as a vinegar extract instead of as a water extract, I could totally do that to get even more minerals out of it. But personally, I don't really like to have that much vinegar early in the morning, so I'm not going to do that in this case. One of the perks of molasses is that it does taste good. It has kind of like that roasted, chocolatey, coffee-like flavor that will complement these herbs. But molasses is also high in minerals, so I get some additional minerals out of the molasses itself. If I wanted to, I could have definitely used yellow dock root in here. That's a classic for high iron and often classically combined with your blackstrap molasses as a herbal natural iron source, but I decided to keep it a little bit more palatable. Yellow dock's not terrible tasting, but it is sort of a little bit bitter and almost incensey, and it really wasn't what I was going for in today's recipe, so I just decided to omit it. But it would be a great addition, especially if you were looking at supporting iron, or if you wanted something that was a little bit laxative, because that is another sort of side benefit or side effect of yellow dock, is that it is mildly laxative and also mildly toning to the colon. All right, there we go. We're starting to bubble up. So I'm gonna take this and put it over on my stove for a little while. We're gonna leave the lid on for this part because I just wanna be simmering, just gentle for about an hour or so. We'll come back, we'll strain it out, and then we'll concentrate it down. So see you in a little bit. So we are back and we're ready for the next step of this concentrated syrup process. And we have this really pretty amazing tea. It's very strong, and we're going to strain it out, and then we're going to get it back on the stove without a cover, simmering, so that we can evaporate it down to make it more concentrated. So let's strain that out and get our tea. And we could work with it just in this, initial format, but I want it to be even stronger, and I want to be able to have a higher amount of molasses in my final product without losing the potency of my herbs. Get that straining out. And this is one of my main ways that I strain a lot of things out, is just through a metal strainer and putting that over a Pyrex pourer. And that works quite nicely for a lot of things. Sometimes I pull out my hydraulic press, or I might actually want a cloth that I can squeeze with my hands, but for a lot of smaller projects, this works quite well. I'm just going to kind of squeeze. Sometimes I get an even bigger spoon and squeeze that out. And for this, I really do like the 32-ounce Pyrex pours. I find them much more usable in all my herbal remedy making versus the 16-ouncers. It just, because it's that little bit bigger, it gives me more space to work with. And then just make sure that whatever strainer you're using fits inside of that. And the cone strainers are particularly nice if you want to be kind of squeezing things through, because it puts that pressure on that bottom point more so than just a more gently angled funnel would do. I'd say that's good enough for now. So we've got this nice, beautiful, pretty strong tea as it is, but I want to make it even more concentrated. We've got 2 cups almost exactly. So we got almost all the water that we put in. If you remember, we put in 2 cups of water. We really didn't lose that much of it in the process, which is pretty amazing. And so we're going to put that back in here, and we're going to simmer it down. And I'm going to give it some time, but I would love if this even got down to be just like maybe half a cup or even less than that. I just want it to be super duper concentrated. And so let's pour it into the pan. And I'm just going to simmer that. Ultimately, I'm going to move it back over to the stove on the simmer burner, but I'm going to bring that back up to a boil and then turn it down to low-ish. I wanted to be putting a little bit of bubbles out there just so that it has a chance to evaporate out that moisture, and your house will smell like herbs while you do that. That's okay. And while it's doing that, the other thing that I'm going to do is I have this little bit of blackstrap molasses that I'm going to finally use up. And so I'm just going to get that, because molasses is slow as molasses. Going to probably give me some trouble, so I'm going to put a little rubber band around it to help me open that up. Here we go. And I'm just going to let that slowly work its way out into my jar, and then whatever else I need, I'll just use this other brand of molasses, but we'll let that do its thing while this simmers. and then we'll come back. This could take a couple hours for it to simmer down, so I'm just going to kind of leave it in the background for a while. Just keep checking it. The one thing you want to be really careful though is, and this has happened and it's very sad when it happens, is if you accidentally let it simmer down to a dry pan and now you have ruined it and you have to start all over again. Keep checking on it periodically. You can either just kind of look at the pan. Some people will measure a stick, a chopstick or something like that, and put a little line on it so that they know, when it gets to be the amount that they want it to be. Or you can just periodically just keep kind of pouring it back into your measuring cup. Be like, all right, yep, I want it, keep simmering down a little bit more, and just keep going back and forth if you have a very specific amount in mind. So I'm hoping to get anywhere between a quarter cup to a half cup, depending upon how patient I am and how quickly this simmers down. So we'll come back in a little while once it's all simmered down and move on to the next step. So see you in a few minutes. So we're back for the very last step, and I've been simmering and checking and simmering and checking, and we are there. So if you remember, we started off with almost 2 cups of liquid of our tea. I've swapped down our Pyrex sizes just a little bit. So on this Pyrex, we would have been up to this point, the 2-cup point. And now we have less than a half a cup left. I'm so excited. And it's just so syrupy. So we have maybe, it's too low for this thing to even measure. So probably about 2 ounces. So, we've evaporated off of almost 14 ounces or so, anywhere between 10, 12, 14 ounces of liquid we've evaporated off just by simmering it uncovered. And this is the same principle that you might use for concentrating like a broth down into ice cubes or something like that. And then this is just plain old molasses right here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pour that right into there. And because we're really not adding that much liquid, but we're putting all that medicine, we had probably about a cupful, I think we had, of herbs, has all been concentrated down to about 2 ounces of the tea. And then we're mixing that in with our molasses. And then I can just take that by the spoonful. And I have that as a herbal remedy that I can have in the morning that's going to give me some extra minerals, a little bit of sweetness from the molasses, some immune support, some alterative support, and I can just add that to my herbal coffee, or I can add it to my regular coffee. It'll augment the pleasant, kind of rich, sort of roasted flavor of the coffee, and just give me a little bit of herbs at the same time. So it's a really fun way to work with it. Let's see what that tastes like now that we're all mixed together. Let's see. Let's show you that. Doesn't that look awesome? It tastes like molasses, because really all those herbs, sorry, I probably have molasses on my lips now. All those herbs, when they're all simmered down and concentrated, really have a flavor that's very complementary with the molasses, and their medicinal properties are also complementary with the molasses. Plus, percentage-wise, most of this spoonful is molasses, but then I get that super concentrated hit of herbs. So have fun playing around with these recipes. You don't necessarily have to concentrate things down that much if you don't want to, but you can if you want to. So play around with it, have fun, happy herbal adventures.